You are listening to the Willpower Podcast. Welcome to the show. I am Will Holdren, and I talk with some of the most influential CEOs, entrepreneurial leaders, and thought leaders to reveal the secrets that have led to their success. I believe that with the right knowledge and mindset, you can do anything you say your mind to. So if you want to learn how to change your life for the better, if you want to learn how millionaires actually became wealthy, or if you want to develop and start your own business from the ground up with the right knowledge to help you, then you are in the right place because this is the Willpower Podcast.
How we doing, everyone? My name is Will Holdren. I'm the host of the Willpower Podcast. Today we have an incredible individual who I actually also met at a Create conference. His name is Josh Porter. And what he does is he focuses on wellness medicine and hormone and health optimization. And his primarily business is called Optimize You, where he owns actually 5 locations. Like I mentioned, they focus on wellness medicine, and he has decades of experience. So it's an absolute honor and privilege to have him on here today. So with that being said, Josh, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Will. It's a pleasure, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, I love it. That conference that we went to, the Create Conference, it really opened up my eyes about, wellness medicine and all things related to health aspects. I never really thought too much into that kind of stuff, but it was really interesting to see what you guys were up there talking about. So I'm really looking forward to having your kind of expertise on the podcast and
Yeah.
sharing what you know. So starting out, I want to ask you a question I ask all of my guests, which is one, what makes you want to take time out of your busy day to hop on podcasts like these to go out there and share your story?
Yeah. Man, I really just have a passion to help people, to be an advocate for people. In my world, that advocacy is often through healthcare. And I think we've, in many ways, lost our ability to take ownership of our health, to become the best version of ourselves. And that's really my mission, is to use platforms that God's given me to be an advocate when, or be a voice when maybe nobody knows what voice they should have. Healthcare is kind of confusing and hard and difficult, and how to navigate those waters. And so, it's just one of those things where I feel like it's an opportunity, if somebody that I know is well aligned with my faith and just the desire to help people, then I'm always going to say yes.
I love that. That's an amazing mission. So talk me through, how did you get started in the health industry as well as entrepreneurship? And did you always grow up and want to be in the health space, entrepreneurship, or how did that get started?
Yeah, no, I'm a late bloomer, you could say. I've been in healthcare for close to 20 years. I'm by trade, I'm a physician associate, and so I'm a provider, and I've worked in healthcare for specifically within that industry for about 15 years, and corporate healthcare most of my time. And it was in during COVID, honestly, where I felt compelled to just kind of step out of the current system. I always tell people there's a difference between well care and sick care. And, the United States model is really sick care medicine, and that's okay to some degree as long as you know that. But when you go to the ER because you have a heart attack, that's where you need to be. You don't need to be showing up in my office, which is a well care clinic, right? Um, but we also have missed it. And so I had a pivot moment, honestly, Will, about 4 or 5 years ago, where I was working in the ER during the height of COVID, and had a patient who was about 63, just wasn't healthy, and on about, we call it polypharmacy, where he was on multiple medications. And so he was overweight. He was on about 20 different medications. By the time he got to us, it was really almost, too little too late. And back then, there's some really true things that happened in COVID. In healthcare, it was nearly impossible to transfer patients. So we were at a small little hospital, and we really needed to be able to transfer, the sicker patients to the level 1 trauma centers in Atlanta and Nashville and those kind of places, right?
Yeah.
But you were inundated because they wouldn't accept patients, and so you were left with kind of managing a lot of really, really sick, critical patients. So I just happened to have to, have the opportunity to care for this guy, and unfortunately, he didn't make it. And it was a moment for me where, rather than being frustrated with the system and say, "Oh my gosh, like, why can't we transfer this guy?" I really felt like God just kind of touched my heart about, like, what could have happened to this guy 20 years ago. Because what you didn't see during COVID, with rare exception, was guys like myself or guys like you, or people who were generally healthy, who were getting sick to the point of not returning, right? Not being able to revitalize. And so there's something to the idea of like staying healthy. And so I left that ER shift that day and thought, man, like I've got plenty of years left in my career that I want to make an impact, and this is not how I wanted to do it. And so
Oh,
really that kind of birthed my desire to step out of the sick care model and into more the healthcare, truly well care model.
yeah, yeah, it's interesting. And like you mentioned, I think a lot of the society is focused on traditional medicine. They're focusing on after you're sick, okay, now what can we do? What kind of medications can we prescribe to you? And like you mentioned, at that point, you kind of already missed the boat of how to prevent all these things happening in the first place.
Yeah.
For your own definition, what would you say is the main difference between what you're doing with wellness medicine, and how would you say that mainly differs from traditional medicine for people
Yeah.
listening?
Well, I think it's there's several things. Like I said earlier, my mission statement, truly this is my life mission statement, my office. Everybody in my staff kind of knows it, and that's to empower and educate people to take ownership of their health to become the best version of themselves. And so that's a very big difference in healthcare from the way we practice medicine, where it's actually we're not speaking at you or to you. We're going along the journey with you, right? We're supporting you. We are. It is in your best interest to understand why your body is functioning or not functioning the way it should or should not. And then what can you do? What resources do I have around to overcome those things, right? If possible. And so we practice preventative health. So that would be a difference where it's reactive in nature with sick care medicine. We are more preventative, proactive in how we try to approach things before disease really starts to take on. We also really talk about a lot of precision medicine. So that's a very individualized focus where it's what, unfortunately, in medicine, a lot of things become cookie cutter algorithm protocols. Hey, if you've got this, then do this. And while that can be helpful, there's the reality is how you respond to a medication or a hormone is different than how somebody else does. And so we are very precise in how we manage those things and very consistent with our approach as far as the long-term management. If you look at just a real quick observation. So before World War II, about 95% of healthcare dollars was spent on acute care medicine, right? So you're getting sick, you're having a heart attack, whatever. Now that same percentage is spent on chronic disease. So we are now spending on things like high blood pressure, hypercholesterol, obesity, diabetes, things like that generally was not even a thing to worry about that was now it's become so inundated. And so much of what we try to do is really try to get ahead of the curve and say, hey, before these diseases, before these chronic issues become a problem, what could we do on the front end for health, from a nutrition standpoint, from an exercise standpoint, from a stress management standpoint, from a hormone standpoint.
Yeah. And it's it's super crazy to hear on my side just how the healthcare industry does not have that approach whatsoever. Like you said, they're always focusing on the back end, not on the front end of how you can prevent these kind of issues. And it seems to me like they put a lot of people in these general categories, and they have one way of solving this problem is like take this medication if you have ADHD, take this medication if you have depression. When what you're saying is everyone's body is different, how you react to certain things is gonna be different than other people and how they react to certain things.
Yeah.
So it's unique because you need to learn about your body and how you can react to these things. So for people that have ADHD or something like that or depression, I mean, what is the best way for them to kind of find out what is really going on in their body and just kind of start out that process to see what is really causing those issues?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think so. So mental health is a very complicated concern because there's not a pill for that, right? I mean, while there may be some medications that can suppress or control, and I'm not saying that no one should ever take an antidepressant. It's just a complex issue, right? It's you've got so many external variables, environmental situations, right? Finances, relationships, jobs, things like that. And so it's a very complex situation, which I think to answer that question requires a lot of time, which is a limitation that we have in traditional healthcare. If you go in and say, "Hey, I'm not feeling so great," here's some symptoms I've got. Well, your provider doesn't have an hour to sit down with you and say, "Well, Will, let's talk about this. Let's really kind of dig into what's going on." Instead, they say, okay, well, here's, 10 milligrams of Lexapro. Let's see if that really calms you down. Or here's some Ativan. This will help you get some sleep since you're not sleeping well. So it's just the inability to really dig in on the front end of finding out why that patient's really in your office. And then I think you have to look at chemical imbalances, right? And we do a lot of that through laboratory work. Um, I'm a big nutraceutical or supplement fan. One of the guys that was at the conference with us was Gary Brecka, who's a huge nutraceutical advocate, and specifically with methylation testing and things like that, where our body's inability to really take a raw product and utilize it in a way that our bodies can metabolize it and use and have it be useful. And so I'm of the opinion that, if there is a genetic component, whether it's what we call alleles or DNA or SNPs, where there's deformities within those things, where a nutraceutical or supplement could replace that. That's great. Um, if you in my world, much of what I do is around hormone optimization, and one of the common issues with mental health concerns in middle-aged, women and who are going through perimenopause and menopause and guys is mental health issues. And so oftentimes it's a hormone imbalance, right? So if you fix these nutraceutical issues or you fix these lifestyle behaviors, and yet they're still struggling, it's good to know, hey, could you also have some low testosterone or low estradiol, and that could be a resource that patient could, at least level up their threshold through which they can tolerate
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah. So like you mentioned, you said a lot of these issues stem from the fact that most people aren't getting the proper nutrients into your body. And like you said, it complicates their body from processing things the way that it should be processing them. And then also could be hormone imbalances. So I mean, it's interesting to me because in America, we're one of the most powerful countries. And I think what Gary Brecka said at the conference and what you also said was just that we're one of the most unhealthy countries out there, and just by the foods we're putting in our bodies. And that leads to what you're talking about, like in these nutrient imbalances. So just based off that, I mean, what would you say are some of the main foods that people should be cutting out just to be healthier overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you could just choose one thing, processed foods, right? Processed foods, sodas, any anything that really is chemically engineered, man-made, so to speak. One of the things that I always talk to my patients about is getting close to the source as possible. So I talk about one ingredient foods, right? So things that are growing out of the ground, fruits, raw honey, oats, potatoes. Those are carbohydrates, but they are very different than potato chips, right? And so moving away from those things, cereals are just absolutely horrific. Majority of cereals are something you should not, and think about the convenience that we look for in food, right? We're giving our kids Lunchables and processed deli meats and cheese that's not real cheese, and we're having because it's convenient, because we're a busy society. And that's the lie that we've been told is, hey, because we've got to be so busy, here's these convenient foods. But to me, I jokingly say, if it comes in a box, I'd probably think twice about buying it. And another, kind of cheat code that I always give my patients is shop on the outer rim of the grocery store, right? If you shop along the deli sections, and you're really, some of your higher quality cheeses and meats and things like that are going to be on that peripheral area of the grocery store, not in the center. In the center is where a lot of your processed foods, boxed stuff, and things like that are found. And so, yeah, that's the easiest thing to do, is eat as fresh as possible, eat as simple as possible. I'm a big fan of a carnivore type approach, so I eat majority protein based from an inflammatory standpoint, but that's not for everybody. But that can be kind of strict, but you just got to find what works for you.
Right. And like you mentioned, stay away from the processed foods. And our society, like you mentioned, everything's just fast, 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 and everyone want things so quickly. And that ultimately, like you mentioned, leads to processed foods. So another topic you just brought up is inflammatory. I think a lot of people out there, they struggle with that and they really don't know how to get rid of that. So just based off that topic, I mean, what are some quick health tips you could give on, lowering inflammation in your body?
Yeah, I mean, I think food is probably the primary resource. As far as things that you can control. Most carbohydrates are going to be pro-inflammatory. So when you are, and if you look at Why does that matter? Well, inflammation is where disease occurs, right? Inflammation is where cholesterol starts to wreak havoc in your bloodstream, right? Because cholesterol by itself is not actually evil, but the inflammatory process in the inner walls of the cardiovascular system that are derived because we're so inflamed, or skin issues because we're so inflamed. So yeah, I would get away from as many processed foods. I'd get away from as many, refined sugars or simple sugars, sodas and things like that. Um, those are very easily. I would try to move away from a lot of chemical like deodorants and shampoos, and really move away from these, we call them endocrine disrupting chemicals, but there's so many you know estrogenic type factors that promote inflammation, or we call them PFAS, or forever chemicals that are found in drinking water, fluoride and all these things that are in our system. We have to be more diligent about really thinking about what we're putting in our mouth. And then, from a non-food standpoint, sleep is a big one. Sleep, poor sleep. And I always joke, this is one area that I struggle to practice what I preach. I don't sleep well. I've been up since 3 o'clock this morning, so it's just not something that I'm gifted at. But when you wake up super early, or when you don't get enough sleep, you have a hormone called cortisol that can promote inflammation, and it rises really earlier than it should. And so when you're dealing with things like that, you're going to have these pro-inflammatory bouts. And so looking for stress management, sleep management, food intake, and then again, hormones, right? Women in particular, I'll just use them because menopause is a factor where the loss of estradiol is pro-inflammatory. And so the replacement of those hormones can oftentimes help with the ability for somebody to fight inflammation. And then there's other products and medications. We use glutathione, which is a really strong antioxidant that patients can use. We use NAD, which is a coenzyme that kind of helps your body fight inflammation. So there's some really, really cool products out there that aren't NSAIDs or anti-inflammatory medications that wreak havoc on your system.
Gotcha. Like you said, it's a confusing space and people don't know where to get the right information. And so it's so easy to just pick up one thing and then that leads to inflammation, and pick up another thing and that leads to inflammation. So I'm glad you're sharing all this. And another point, great point you mentioned, was sleeping. And I think a lot of people struggle with sleeping nowadays, especially because of cell phones and people are on that constantly, and it kind of messes up their whole system. So on the sleep topic, I mean, what would you recommend just to kind of help better sleep, to get longer sleep and more productive sleep? I mean, magnesium before you go to sleep? Is it staying off your phone before you go to sleep, not eating before a certain amount of time, or what you
Yeah, all of the above.
recommend?
Fasting before bed, if you could fast a couple hours before bed, that would help. One of the things Gary Brecka talks about is contrast showers about an hour before bed. So you get this really warm water on the nape of your neck for a couple of minutes, and then you flip it to cold water, and you try to stay there for 30 seconds to 60 seconds, about an hour beforehand. We talk about sleep hygiene. That's kind of how I reference this. I'm big on really trying to get blue light out of the, situation. So getting away from screens, and again, this is not something I'm perfect at. I encourage most people. I'll use myself as an example. Talking about last night, I typically leave my phone out of my room, and for whatever reason, I kept it by my nightstand last night. And at 2:17 this morning, some notification went off on my phone. It didn't buzz. It just popped on, right? So the screen came on, and I happened to be facing that screen, and I woke up and I could not go back to sleep. And so that was the struggle that I had until I finally got out of bed around 3. But the issue was I had put my phone where I shouldn't have put it, right? So I learned, but that's a big one, is really getting away from a lot of electronics and exposures. Sleeping with the temperature kind of cool, that can be helpful. Wearing eye mask, that can be helpful. That would probably help me this morning had I not had my phone right beside of me, because I wouldn't have seen it.
Gotcha. At the same time, you're an entrepreneur too. So like you said, it's hard just to stay away from that kind of stuff. And it's hard to get more sleep when you're working constantly. You're running 5 different locations. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you got to be on top of. So
Yeah, that's right.
it's definitely a balancing act. Another thing you talked about earlier was water, and how important it was to get the right kind of water into your system. That's not just tap water, or maybe not even
Mhm.
filter water. So do you mind expanding on that? Because I think a lot of people have misconceptions about water and just really like what you should be looking for to get water into your system to make it the most appropriate to helping you get healthier.
Yeah, hydrogenated water would be, and that's something that's a machine or I guess a bottle that you buy that actually adds hydrogen back into the water. Is probably the best thing you can do when it comes to what's the best water. But not everybody wants to make those kind of investments. A good hydrogenated water bottle is probably $250. And so for people who don't want to do that, Mountain Spring Valley water is really good. You want to try your best to drink water out of glass as much as possible because you want to avoid microplastics. And so majority of the, water bottles that we're using that are plastic have, the BPA and the microplastics. And again, those kind of wreak havoc on our system and or pro-inflammatory. So I'm a big fan of water. Now, in a pinch, I'm going to drink water out of a plastic water bottle over nothing, right? But in an ideal scenario, spring water out of a glass would be, exceptional if you're going to the grocery store, or stopping by a convenience store and you've got to pick something up. And then a hydrogenated water bottle is probably the elite.
What is the benefit of adding hydrogen to water? Does that just make it more alkaline at the end of the day, or
It
how does it?
does. Yeah, it just helps with your immune system, helps with inflammation, helps restore. It's called a mitochondrial health, so how our bodies restore and carry oxygen. So the mitochondria is really the powerhouse of the cell, and it replenishes the cell's function. And so you're basically giving your body an alkaline state that allows yourself to fight and keep inflammation really low and just function at a very high level.
Interesting. Okay. It's just benefiting the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. Remember that from
Yeah.
eighth grade science class. So
Yeah.
there you go. Another thing Gary Breckett actually mentioned at the conference was adding salt to water and how that could be beneficial for you long term. So, what is the kind of benefits to adding salt to water, and how does that affect you?
Yeah, one of I mean, the main issue with salt is the minerals. I think like he talks about Baja Gold sea salt, and 91 minerals inside of that product. And so when you talk about essential amino acids or essential vitamins and minerals, these are things that our body has to have to survive. And that's why we call this biohacking. It's not rocket science. When Gary's talking about Baja Gold sea salt and the benefits because it helps with osmosis and kind of keeping water in the system, right? I mean, he's talking literally about taking a pinch out of that bottle, that bag, and putting it into his water in the mornings, to give him those 91 minerals that are required for that cellular health. And so, but you have to utilize those things, otherwise you're going to find deficiencies, and then you're going to have to go from there to more supplements or things of that nature that get costly, right? Baja Gold sea salt is, I think, $20, and he talks about all the time where the bag's going to last you 5 years. You probably can't find a better, biohacking situation that costs that cheap.
Yeah, that's definitely an easy, quick health tip you can just implement into your day, and just like I said, it's 20 bucks and you'd be good for the next 5 years.
Yeah,
So
it's great. It's fantastic.
yeah, but it's also probably important not to overdo it, correct? Just because of sodium levels, and you don't want to get too high of sodium.
Yeah, you don't want to overdo it. So typically I do one in the morning and I'm done with
Okay.
my salt intake. And magnesium, a lot of times other people are confused about things like cramps and you'll hear that, oh, I'm depleted in salt. You're probably depleted in magnesium. And so I'm a big fan of magnesium supplementation. You asked me that about sleep, but magnesium I use a lot for patients who complain of cramps, not potassium or sodium.
Okay, awesome. I actually got a bottle of magnesium after that conference too. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna add that to what I'm doing
Yep.
daily. So probably
Fantastic.
can't hurt. So I know we're almost running out of time. So I got a couple more questions for you before we.
Sure.
So going forward for you, I mean, obviously you've done so much. You made a pretty big pivot in your career during COVID to go into optimize. You know, you have 5 locations. I mean, you're growing and you're spreading a really great message, and you're also doing it as a faith-based entrepreneur, which I absolutely love. But looking ahead for you, I mean, what are some of the main goals you hope to accomplish here in next year or two?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, just super vulnerable is also have been married for 21 years and I've got 5 kids, and I don't know that I've got that figured out yet. How to find I don't know that balance is even a word that fits into my vocabulary, because it is a grind, right? It is a daily, perpetual, just go 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 with the desire to impact a lot of people, and so you know I think what do I want to see over the next year or two is continue that mission, right? Continue to impact people, to continue to replicate myself. One of the things as entrepreneurs you find pretty quickly is that you are the rate limiting factor in a lot of your success. And so when you first start, if you have something in you that God's put in you to then go out and impact people, you've got, in order to really broadly scale that, you've got to help other people find that in them. And so that's been so learning, that's finding that that's a weakness of mine, is that I'd rather kind of just hold on to it myself and do it myself. And I trust me more than I trust anybody. And that's not how you equip people. That's not how God intended it, right? God put something uniquely in each one of us. And so for the next year or two, really, actually, just right before Create, I had an executive team leadership meeting. Ken came to it and he spoke about it a little bit. But I told there's three people in my life that are on the executive team, and that's my mission for the next 2 years, is to pour into them so that they can then pour into others. So as I shout out from the rooftops the vision, how do they then help me implement it?
Just creating more and more leaders. I love that. That's
Yeah.
a, that's very cool. My last question is for people listening to this. Obviously, we went through a lot of different topics, and there's probably like a lot of questions popping up for these people. But for people that want to start out on their health journey and just really learn how to understand what's going on in their bodies, and what is the best way for them to get started?
Well, I think in today's world we have the unbelievable privilege and opportunity to follow a lot of people who do what I do much better, right? The Gary Breckers of the world and these influencers who, I mean, they're at the tips of your fingertip on your social media accounts. And so I think that would be a suggestion I would have is equip yourself, right? Find people where when you listen to them talk about your health, Josh Axe, Paul Saladino. I mean, there's so many different people out there who are going against the grain, and Callie Means and Casey and Callie Means, who have written a book recently. I mean, there's just so many people who are really fighting this fight. And so I would say that would be one, is equip yourself, empower yourself with people that are advocates who are maybe a little further along in the journey. And then look for people, like myself. I can't serve everybody. And there's a lot of other good people throughout the United States who do what we do. And so just finding yourself, just do not allow the status quo to be put on you by your medical staff, right? When you walk into your office and to the doctor's office and you say, hey, this is what, and it's like you're dismissed. That's just not the place you need to be, right? You need to find a spot where it's like, man, they listened to me, they encouraged me, they supported me, even if they didn't know the answer. I felt valued. And you'll get a long way in your health journey if you find somebody who values you as an individual, and doesn't feel like they have to get you in and out of their office in 10 minutes.
Right, where it's more of a personal experience. And I love what you said, that there's a lot of people out there fighting the good fight, and it's amazing to me. I think there's going to be a big health revolution going on. I think there is one going on. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
trying to be healthier. It's more of a status quo to be healthier, to not be drinking, to not be smoking, any of that stuff. So I'm
Yeah.
excited where that goes into the future. So with that being said, I appreciate you being on here. Is there anything else you'd like to say? And if people want to reach out to you or optimize you, how can they go about and find you guys?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Josh Porter PA. You can also find us Optimize You Chattanooga or OU Chat on most of those platforms. But man, super impressed by you, Will. I just appreciate. I listened to a few of your episodes when you invited me on, and just really appreciate the work you're doing. And I mean, I'm a few years down the road from where you're at, and to think that you are showing up in a room like Create and putting yourself in a situation. Ken talks about proximity is the cheat code, and you're putting yourself in a situation at a very young age where there's not many people going your route, my man. And so I just want you to hear it from me that I appreciate who you are as an individual, and just and the fight that you are putting in right now. So well done, and stay on the journey.
I really do appreciate that. Thank you very much.
You
All right,
bet.
guys, there you have it. Go follow him. Josh Porter, thank you so much for joining me today.
You bet.